Hello, I present to you a fan fiction set in the world of the game Gothic. Title, Shadows of the Barrier. Chapter 1, Into the Colony. The sun was setting over the jagged peaks of the Valley of Mines, casting long, ominous shadows over the landscape. Distant howls echoed through the craggy terrain as the scavengers and wolves began their nightly hunt. The air was thick with tension as a solitary figure approached the entrance of the old camp, his eyes scanning the heavy wooden gate and the armed guards posted atop the battlements. His name was Darek, a former soldier now condemned to the penal colony for a crime he didn't commit. His heart pounded as he stepped through the gate, the weight of the magical barrier that enclosed the entire valley pressing down on him like a physical force. This was no ordinary prison. It was a brutal, lawless world where only the strongest survived. The old camp was a sprawling, chaotic mess of shacks and makeshift buildings with a towering castle looming in its center. Fires burned in crude pits and groups of convicts milled about, their eyes suspicious and their hands never far from the hilts of crude swords or the hafts of makeshift clubs. The stench of unwashed bodies and cooking meat filled the air. Darek's arrival did not go unnoticed. A burly man with a scarred face and a deep scowl approached him, flanked by two other men. They were all clad in rough, patched armor, the insignia of the old camp emblazoned on their chests. "New here, are you?" The man sneered, looking Darek up and down. "Name's Thoris. I'm the head of security. What's your story, newcomer?" Darek swallowed, his throat dry. He knew that showing weakness would only make things worse. "Name's Darek. Former soldier framed for desertion. They threw me in here without a second thought." Thoris's eyes narrowed. "Desertion, eh? Doesn't matter now. You're in the colony, and here, the rules are different. If you want to survive, you'll need protection. That protection costs ore. Ore, the lifeblood of the colony. It was used as currency, traded for food, weapons, and favors. Without it, a man was as good as dead." "I don't have any ore," Darek said, his jaw clenched. Thoris chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "No ore? No problem. You'll earn it. There's always work to be done. Report to the smithy. They can use an extra pair of hands." Before Darek could protest, Thoris and his men turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the center of the camp. He looked around, feeling the eyes of the other convicts on him, sizing him up, judging whether he was worth the effort to rob or kill. He took a deep breath and headed towards the smithy, determined to keep his head down and find a way to survive in this hellish place. The smithy was a small, cramped building near the edge of the camp. The air inside was thick with the smell of molten metal and sweat. A muscular man with a shaved head and a face smeared with soot looked up as Darek entered. "You must be the new guy," the man grunted. "Name's Huno. Thoris sent you?" Darek nodded. "Yeah, said you could use some help." Huno gestured to a pile of rusty swords and broken tools. "Start by fixing these. It's simple work, but it'll earn you some ore. And if you do a good job, I might have more work for you." Darek picked up a hammer and began his work. The hours passed slowly, the repetitive clang of metal on metal filling his ears. His muscles ached from the unaccustomed labor, but he pushed through the pain, his mind focused on the task at hand. This was his chance to prove himself, to gain a foothold in this dangerous place. As night fell, Darek finished the last of the repairs and wiped the sweat from his brow. Huno inspected his work, grunting in approval. "Not bad for a first day. Here's some ore for your trouble." He handed Darek a small pouch. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Darek pocketed the ore and thanked Huno before stepping outside into the cool night air. The camp was quieter now, the fires burning low. He made his way to a small, empty shack near the edge of the camp, claiming it as his own. It wasn't much, a roof over his head and a bit of privacy, but it was more than some had. He sat on the rough wooden floor, staring out at the flickering lights of the camp. The colony was a harsh, unforgiving place, but he wasn't going to let it break him. He would find a way to survive, to rise above the chaos and the violence, and one day he would find a way out of this cursed valley, to prove his innocence and reclaim his life. For now, though, survival was his only goal. As he lay down on the hard floor, exhaustion washing over him, he thought of the barrier that loomed over them all, shimmering in the darkness like a mocking prison wall. It kept them in, but it also kept something else out, something dangerous, something the guards and convicts spoke of in hushed tones. Whatever it was, Darek knew it was only a matter of time before he found out. Chapter 2, The Dark Forest. Darek awoke with a start, the cold, damp air of the early morning filling his lungs. His body ached from the hard floor, but there was no time to dwell on the discomfort. He knew that if he wanted to survive, he had to keep moving, keep earning ore, and avoid attracting too much attention. The old camp was a dangerous place, and those who lingered in one spot too long often found themselves caught up in conflicts they couldn't escape. He left his shack and made his way back to the smithy, hoping that Huno would have more work for him. The camp was already buzzing with activity, convicts going about their business with a weary efficiency. As Darek approached the smithy, he noticed a commotion near the entrance of the camp. A group of guards were gathered around something, their voices raised in anger and fear. Curious, Darek edged closer, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening. As he pushed through the crowd, he saw what had drawn the guards' attention. A man, his body battered and bloodied, lay on the ground. His clothes were torn, and deep, jagged wounds crisscrossed his chest and arms. It was clear that he had been attacked, but not by any human weapon. "What happened to him?" Darek asked a nearby convict. The man shook his head, his face pale. He was out gathering herbs near the edge of the dark forest. Something got him. Something big. He barely made it back to the camp. The dark forest. The name alone was enough to send a chill down Darek's spine. It was a place of legend and fear, a dense, tangled maze of trees and undergrowth that bordered the eastern side of the colony. Few dared to venture into its depths, and those who did often didn't return. The forest was said to be home to creatures far more dangerous than the scavengers and wolves that roamed the valley. "What kind of creature?" Darek asked, his curiosity piqued. The convict shrugged. "Who knows? Some say it's a shadow beast. Others say it's something worse. All I know is that I'm not going anywhere near that place." Darek watched as the guards carried the wounded man away, his mind racing. The attack was a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the relative safety of the camp. But it also presented an opportunity. If he could find out what had attacked the man, if he could bring back proof, it might earn him respect, and more importantly, ore. He made his way to the smithy, where Huno was already hard at work, hammering out a dent in a breastplate. The blacksmith looked up as Darek approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "Back again, eh? I didn't expect you to stick around," Huno said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "I need more ore," Darek replied simply. "And I heard about the attack this morning. Do you know anything about it?" Huno frowned, setting his hammer aside. "Only what everyone else knows. Some fool got too close to the dark forest and paid the price. It's not the first time it's happened, and it won't be the last." "What if I went out there?" Darek asked, surprising even himself with his boldness. "What if I found out what's attacking people and brought back proof?" Huno raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "And why would you do something so stupid?" Darek shrugged, though his heart was pounding. "I need ore, and I need to prove myself. If I can take down whatever's out there, maybe I can get both." The blacksmith stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're either brave or a damn fool. Probably both. But if you're serious about this, you'll need more than that rusty sword you're carrying. Take this." He reached under the workbench and pulled out a sword, its blade gleaming in the light of the forge. It was a simple weapon, but well made and sharp. Darek took it, feeling the weight of it in his hand. "Thanks," he said, his voice sincere. "Don't thank me yet," Huno grunted. "If you die out there, I'll just take it back." Darek left the smithy and made his way towards the eastern gate of the camp. He passed groups of convicts going about their business, some casting him curious or suspicious glances, but no one tried to stop him. The guards at the gate eyed him warily as he approached. "Where do you think you're going?" One of them, a burly man with a scarred face, asked. "I'm heading to the dark forest," Darek replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I heard about the attack this morning. I want to find out what did it." The guard snorted. "You're crazy, but it's your funeral. Just don't expect us to come rescue you when things go south." Darek nodded and passed through the gate, stepping out into the wild, untamed land beyond the camp. The air was cooler here. the ground uneven and covered in a thick carpet of fallen leaves and pine needles. He tightened his grip on the sword and made his way towards the forest, his senses alert for any sign of danger. The dark forest loomed ahead, its tangled branches and dense undergrowth casting deep, forbidding shadows. As he drew closer, the sounds of the camp faded away, replaced by the eerie silence of the woods. He paused at the edge of the forest, his heart pounding. Every instinct told him to turn back, to return to the relative safety of the camp. But he forced himself to take a step forward, then another, until he was swallowed by the dark, oppressive embrace of the trees. The forest was a maze of twisted roots and gnarled branches, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, the crunch of his boots on the forest floor, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of something moving in the underbrush. He moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Hours passed, and the deeper he went, the darker and more foreboding the forest became. He felt as though he was being watched, but every time he turned, there was nothing there. Just the silent, oppressive weight of the trees pressing in on all sides. Then, just as he was about to turn back, he heard it, a low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of something massive crashing through the undergrowth. His heart leapt into his throat as he spun around, his sword raised, searching for the source of the noise. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, and a massive shape emerged from the shadows. It was a creature like nothing Darek had ever seen, its body covered in thick, matted fur, its jaws filled with razor-sharp teeth. It moved with a terrifying, predatory grace, circling him slowly, its eyes never leaving his. Darek tightened his grip on the sword, his mind racing. This was it, the thing that had attacked the man near the camp. If he could kill it, if he could bring back proof, he would be a hero. But as the creature lunged at him, its jaws snapping shut inches from his face, he realized just how outmatched he was. He barely had time to react, swinging the sword in a desperate arc. The blade connected with the creature's side, drawing a line of blood, but it only seemed to enrage it further. It let out a deafening roar, its claws raking across Darek's arm, sending him sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through him as he scrambled to his feet, his vision swimming. The creature circled him again, its eyes gleaming with a savage, almost intelligent hunger. Darek knew he couldn't fight it head-on, not like this. He had to be smarter, faster. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. Then, just as the creature lunged at him again, he threw himself to the side, rolling across the ground and coming up behind it. Before it could turn, he drove the sword into its side with all his strength, feeling the blade sink deep into muscle and bone. The creature let out a horrific, ear-piercing screech, thrashing wildly. Darek held on, his hands slick with blood, until the creature finally collapsed, its body twitching before going still. For a long moment, Darek just stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his entire body trembling. He had done it. He had killed the beast. But as he looked down at the creature's massive, lifeless form, a sense of unease settled over him. There was something wrong about this, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He knew that this was just the beginning, that whatever darkness lurked in the depths of the dark forest was far from vanquished. With a grimace, he pulled the sword free and turned back the way he had come, the weight of the day's events heavy on his shoulders. He would return to the camp, show them what he had done. But in his heart, he knew that the real battle was still ahead. The return to the old camp was a blur for Darek. His mind still reeled from the encounter in the dark forest, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving him drained and numb. As he stumbled through the camp gate, bloodied and battered, the guards exchanged incredulous glances. One of them, the same scarred man who had mocked Darek earlier, whistled low. "Back from the dead, are we?" the guard called out. "Didn't think we'd see you again." Darek ignored him, his focus set on one goal, getting to Thoris. The head of security would need to see the proof, to understand that he had taken down whatever had been terrorizing the outskirts of the camp. He pushed through the crowd that had gathered, his steps faltering but determined. "Move aside!" A familiar voice barked, and Darek looked up to see Thoris himself, his eyes narrowed as he assessed the scene. "What the hell happened out there, newcomer?" Darek held up the bloodied pelt he had stripped from the beast. It was heavy in his hands, the fur matted and dark with blood. I killed it. The thing that attacked your man this morning. It won't be bothering the camp anymore. Thoris's eyes widened slightly, and he took the pelt from Darek, his fingers brushing against the coarse fur. He examined it for a long moment, then looked back at Darek, a grudging respect in his gaze. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. You actually did it. I didn't think you had it in you. Darek straightened, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. I did what I had to. Now, I want what's mine. Or food, and a place where I don't have to worry about getting a knife in my back every night. Thoris chuckled, a harsh sound that echoed in the tense silence of the camp. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Fine. You've earned yourself a place here. Report to the barracks. I'll make sure you're taken care of. The gathered crowd murmured, and Darek could feel their eyes on him, weighing, judging. But he didn't care. He had survived, and he had earned his place. For now, that was enough. The barracks were a simple, Spartan affair, a long, low building filled with rough wooden bunks and the stench of sweat and old leather. Darek claimed a cot near the back, dropping his meager belongings onto the thin mattress. He could feel the eyes of the other men on him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. One of them, a lean, wiry man with sharp features and a shifty gaze, sidled up to him as he sat down. You're the one who killed the beast, huh? The man asked, his voice low and quick. Word travels fast around here. They're calling you Beast Slayer. Not bad for a newcomer. Darek glanced at him, wary. And who are you? The man grinned, a flash of yellowed teeth. Name's Fisk. I'm the camp's, let's say, entrepreneur. I deal in things that people need, food, weapons, information. And I've got a proposition for you. Darek raised an eyebrow. What kind of proposition? Fisk leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You're a fighter. That much is obvious. And fighters like you can make a lot of ore, if they know where to look. There's a group of us who run the arena fights, unofficial, of course. Thoris looks the other way as long as we don't cause too much trouble. You enter the ring, show those scum what you're made of, and you'll be rolling in ore in no time. Darek frowned, his mind racing. The idea of fighting for sport didn't sit well with him, but he needed ore, and he needed allies. If Fisk's offer was as good as he claimed, it could be a way to secure both. I'll think about it, he said cautiously. Fisk shrugged. Suit yourself. Just remember, the offer's open, and if you need anything else, food, supplies, a bit of extra muscle, I'm your man. With that, he slipped away, leaving Darek alone with his thoughts. He lay back on the cot, staring up at the wooden ceiling. The events of the day had left him shaken, but he couldn't afford to rest. There were too many questions still unanswered. What had that creature been? It wasn't like any beast he'd encountered before, and its presence in the dark forest felt wrong, unnatural. And there was something else, a nagging feeling that he couldn't shake. The sense that the creature's death was just the beginning, that there was something darker lurking beneath the surface of the colony. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Thoris kept his word, providing Darek with food and a steady supply of work. He spent most of his time at the smithy, helping Huno with repairs and occasionally venturing out to gather materials. The camp began to feel almost familiar, though he never let his guard down. Danger was always close, whether from the convicts themselves or the constant threat of attacks from outside. One evening, as he was finishing up at the forge, Huno approached him, his expression unusually serious. You've made a name for yourself here, the blacksmith said, folding his arms. But there's more to this place than just the old camp. There are other factions, the new camp, the sect camp, and they're not too happy about us. Darek frowned. He had heard whispers about the other camps, but he hadn't given them much thought. The old camp was dangerous enough without worrying about what lay beyond its borders. What do you mean? He asked. Huno sighed. Tensions are high. The new camp's been getting bolder, raiding our supplies, attacking our men. And the sect camp, well, they're a whole different problem. They keep to themselves mostly, but they've got their own agenda, and it's not one that's good for the rest of us. Darek considered this, his mind racing. He had come to the colony focused only on survival, but it was becoming clear that there was much more at stake. The camps were more than just prisons. They were rival factions, each with its own goals and ambitions. What's your point, Huno? He asked finally. The blacksmith met his gaze, his eyes hard. My point is, you've proven yourself. You've got skills, and more importantly, you've got guts. Thoris might trust you, but the rest of the camp is still watching. If you really want to make a difference here, you need to pick a side, and soon. Darek nodded slowly. He knew Huno was right. The old camp was a powder keg waiting to explode, and when it did, he needed to be ready. But which side to choose? The old camp had been his home since he arrived, but the other camps, what did they offer? Freedom? Power? Or just a different kind of prison? He would have to find out for himself, and he would have to do it soon, before the fragile balance of the colony shattered completely. As he left the smithy that night, the shadows deepening around him, Darek made his way to the edge of the camp, staring out towards the distant glow of the new camp. He had faced beasts and braved the darkness of the forest, but he knew that the real danger lay not in the wilderness, but in the hearts of men. He had survived the creature in the dark forest. Now, he would have to survive the shifting allegiances and deadly politics of the colony itself. Chapter 4. Voices of the New Camp. Darek moved cautiously along the rocky path leading towards the new camp, his heart pounding with anticipation. He had spent the last few days gathering information, talking to anyone who might know something about the other camps. Now, with the new camp visible in the distance, he was about to take the first step into unfamiliar territory. He knew he had to be careful. The old camp and the new camp might have been rivals, but the real danger came from being caught in the middle. The path wound through dense undergrowth, the trees crowding close on either side. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and the distant sound of water rushing over rocks reached his ears. He had heard rumors about the new camp, how it was built around a vast lake, its people free from the iron grip of the old camp's guards. But he had also heard darker stories, of power struggles and dangerous secrets hidden beneath the camp's seemingly peaceful exterior. As he approached the entrance to the new camp, Darek slowed, his eyes scanning the surroundings. 2 men stood guard, their expressions wary. They were dressed in rough leather armor, their weapons at the ready. Darek took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Hold it," one of the guards barked, his voice sharp. "Who are you and what do you want?" "My name is Darek," he replied, keeping his tone calm. "I'm from the old camp. I've come to talk." The guards exchanged a glance. Then the one who had spoken stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Talk about what?" Darek hesitated. He hadn't fully thought through what he would say, but he knew he needed to make a good impression. "I've heard about the tensions between our camps. I think there's a way we can work together, find common ground." The guard's expression didn't change, but Darek saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Wait here," he said finally. "I'll get someone who can talk to you." Darek watched as the guard disappeared into the camp, his heart still racing. He had no idea how this would play out, but he was committed now. All he could do was wait and hope that he hadn't made a mistake. After a few tense minutes, the guard returned, accompanied by a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He wore a set of finely crafted leather armor, and there was an air of authority about him that marked him as someone important. "I'm Laris," the man said, his voice steady and calm. "I'm the leader of the new camp. You say you want to talk?" Darek nodded. "Yes, I've been in the old camp for a few weeks now, and I've seen how things are run there. The guards are corrupt, the people are struggling just to survive. It's not sustainable. I've heard that the new camp is different, that you offer freedom and a chance for a better life." Laris's gaze was steady, assessing. "And what's your angle in all this? Why come to us?" Darek took a deep breath. "Because I want to know if it's true. If there really is a better way to live in this colony. And if there is, I want to be part of it." Laris studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're either brave or very foolish coming here like this. But you're right. Things are different here. We don't bow to Gomez or his thugs. We live on our own terms. But it's not an easy life. Everyone has to pull their weight." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Darek said quickly. "I can fight and I can help. All I ask is a chance to prove myself." Laris raised an eyebrow. "You can fight, can you?" I've heard rumors about a newcomer in the old camp, someone who took down a beast from the dark forest. Was that you? Darek nodded. Yes, it was. I killed it and brought back proof. Laris's expression turned thoughtful. Impressive. That takes guts and skill. But killing a beast is one thing. Surviving here with the free miners and the mercenaries is another. Darek straightened, meeting Laris's gaze. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. For a moment, Laris said nothing. Then he gestured for Darek to follow him. Come, I'll show you what we're about. The new camp was a stark contrast to the old camp. Built around a large lake, the settlement sprawled along the rocky shores, its wooden huts and tents interspersed with lush greenery. The air was filled with the sounds of water, laughter, and the steady clink of tools. People moved about with a purpose, but there was a sense of freedom and energy that Darek had never felt in the old camp. This is the heart of the new camp, Laris said as they walked along a narrow path that wound through the camp. We're a community here. Free miners, mercenaries, farmers. We all work together to keep things running. But make no mistake, it's not some utopia. We have our problems and our enemies. He led Darek to a large, open area near the edge of the lake. A group of men and women were gathered there, training with swords and bows. These are the mercenaries, Laris explained. They keep the camp safe, both from the old camp's thugs and the creatures outside the barrier. If you want to prove yourself, this is where you start. Darek watched as the mercenaries sparred, their movements quick and precise. He could feel their eyes on him, measuring, judging. He knew he had to make a decision. I'll do it, he said finally. I'll train with them, fight with them, whatever it takes. Laris nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. Good. I'll have one of the mercenaries show you the ropes. But remember, loyalty here is earned, not given. Prove yourself, and you'll find a place among us. Fail, and you'll be back in the old camp, or worse. Darek spent the next few days training with the mercenaries. They were a tough, disciplined group, and they didn't go easy on him. He sparred with swords, practiced with bows, and learned the basics of surviving in the wilderness. It was hard, grueling work, but Darek threw himself into it with everything he had. He knew he was being watched, tested, and he was determined not to fail. One evening, as he was practicing his archery, a figure approached him, a tall woman with short, cropped hair and a serious expression. She moved with a predator's grace, her eyes sharp and piercing. "You're the newcomer," she said, her voice low and calm. "I'm Gorn. Laris asked me to check on your progress." Darek straightened, his heart pounding. Gorn was one of the camp's most respected mercenaries, known for her skill and ruthlessness. If she was here, it meant his training was being taken seriously. "I'm doing my best," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Gorn nodded, her gaze assessing. "You've got potential. But potential isn't enough. This isn't just about fighting. It's about surviving, about understanding the stakes. The old camp, the sect camp, they're not just our rivals, they're threats. Gomez and his men would crush us if they could, and the sect camp, well, they're dangerous in their own way." "What do you mean?" Darek asked, curious. Gorn hesitated, then glanced around, lowering her voice. "There's something going on in the sect camp. Their leader, Iberion, he's been talking about visions, about a coming change. They're up to something big. We don't know what it is yet, but it's making the other camps nervous." Darek frowned, trying to process this new information. He had heard about the sect camp, about their strange beliefs and rituals, but he had dismissed them as little more than a cult. Now it seemed there was more to them than he had realized. "What can I do?" he asked finally. Gorn looked at him, her expression serious. "Keep training, prove yourself. If you can gain our trust, if you can show that you're more than just a fighter, there might be a place for you here. But remember, this isn't just about survival anymore. It's about choosing sides, and choosing wisely." Darek nodded, his mind racing. He had come to the new camp seeking answers, but all he had found were more questions. The colony was a powder keg, and it felt like the fuse was already burning. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just a pawn in the games of the old camp. He was a player now, and the stakes were higher than ever. Title: Shadows of the Barrier, Chapter 5, Tensions Rising. The days in the new camp were grueling, but satisfying. Darek found himself fitting in better than he'd expected. The mercenaries respected strength and determination, and he had plenty of both. Every day was a test of skill, endurance, and loyalty. He had to prove himself over and over, but he welcomed the challenge. It was a welcome change from the oppressive atmosphere of the old camp. As he trained and worked alongside the others, Darek began to understand the complexities of the camp's dynamics. The free miners, led by the enigmatic Lee, were the backbone of the camp, providing ore and resources. The mercenaries, under Laris, were the camp's protectors and enforcers. And then there were the water mages, a mysterious group who seemed to hold the true power behind the scenes. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of training, Darek found himself sitting alone by the lake, staring out at the calm waters. The sounds of the camp drifted around him. Laughter, the clinking of tools, the crackle of fires. Despite the hardships, there was a sense of camaraderie here that he hadn't felt in the old camp. "You look deep in thought," a voice said, and Darek turned to see a man approaching. He was tall and lean, with a shaven head and piercing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Diego," Darek said, recognizing the scout who had been keeping an eye on him since his arrival. Diego was one of Laris's most trusted men, a skilled fighter and a keen observer. "I've been watching you," Diego said, dropping down beside him. "You've adapted quickly. Not many make the transition from the old camp to here so smoothly." Darek shrugged. "I've been through worse." Diego nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Maybe so, but it's not just about survival. You're making waves. People are talking." Darek frowned. "What do you mean?" Diego leaned back, his eyes on the water. "You've got potential. You're strong, resourceful. Larry sees it. So does Lee. And that's caught the attention of a lot of people, not all of them friendly." "Like who?" Diego hesitated, then glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "There are factions within the camp, just like in the old camp. Some people think we should focus on mining and trading, keep our heads down, and stay out of trouble. Others, mostly the mercenaries, think we should be preparing for a fight, taking a more aggressive stance against Gomez and his men." "And what do you think?" Darek asked, curious. Diego smiled faintly. "I think we're sitting on a powder keg. The old camp, the sect camp, even the creatures outside the barrier, they're all threats. And if we don't do something soon, we're going to get caught in the middle of it." Darek absorbed this, his mind racing. He had come to the new camp looking for a new start, a place where he could find some semblance of freedom. But it seemed that no matter where he went, the colony's tangled web of alliances and rivalries would find him. "What can I do?" he asked finally. Diego gave him a long, considering look. "Keep your head down. Keep training, and be careful who you trust. Things are changing, and not everyone who smiles at you is a friend." With that, Diego stood, giving Darek a brief nod before walking away. Darek watched him go, a sense of unease settling in his gut. Diego's warning was clear. Danger was coming, and he would need to be ready. The next few days were tense. Darek threw himself into his training, honing his skills and pushing his limits. He sparred with the other mercenaries, went on scouting missions with Diego, and even spent time with the water mages, learning about their strange and powerful magic. It was during one of these sessions with the mages that he met Saturus, the head of the water mages and one of the most powerful figures in the camp. Saturus was a tall, imposing man with a stern face and a voice like thunder. He moved with the calm assurance of someone who had seen and done things beyond the understanding of most men. "You've been making quite an impression," Saturus said as Darek approached him in the mage's tower. "Laris speaks highly of you." "I'm just trying to do my part," Darek said cautiously. Saturus nodded, his gaze piercing. "And that's exactly why I wanted to speak with you. The new camp is at a crossroads. We have the ore, we have the people, but we lack the one thing that could truly free us from the old camp's control." "And what's that?" Darek asked, though he had a feeling he knew the answer. "Magic," Saturus said simply. "The old camp controls the only access to the Sleeper's relics, the source of their power. But we've found a way to change that, a way to harness the power of the barrier itself." Darek felt a chill run down his spine. The barrier was the prison that held them all, an impenetrable wall of energy that trapped every convict and creature within its borders. The idea of using it as a weapon, or worse, a tool, was both thrilling and terrifying. "How?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Satyrus smiled faintly. That I cannot tell you. Not yet. But know this. If we succeed, the new camp will be more than just a refuge. We will be the masters of the colony, and you, Darek, could play a part in that. Darek swallowed, his mind reeling. He had come to the new camp seeking a fresh start, a place where he could carve out his own path. But now he was faced with a choice that could shape the future of the entire colony. I don't know what to say, he admitted finally. Satyrus's expression softened slightly. You don't need to decide now, just think about it. And be careful. There are forces at work here that you can't begin to understand. With that, the mage turned away, leaving Darek alone with his thoughts. As he made his way back to his quarters that night, Darek felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders. The stakes were higher than he had imagined, and the choices he made now could have consequences far beyond his own survival. The next morning, Darek awoke to the sound of raised voices outside his tent. He stepped out, blinking in the early morning light, to find a group of mercenaries gathered near the center of the camp, their faces tense and angry. What's going on? He asked one of them, a burly man named Wolf. Trouble, Wolf muttered, his expression grim. One of our scouts was found dead near the old camp's border. They're saying it was Gomez's men. Darek felt a surge of anger and fear. If the old camp was starting to target the new camp directly, it could mean war. What are we going to do? He asked. Wolf shrugged, his eyes hard. Laris is talking to Lee now. They're deciding whether to hit back or try to negotiate, but things are on a knife's edge. One wrong move, and this whole place could go up in flames. Darek nodded, his mind racing. He thought of Diego's warning, of Satyrus's cryptic words. The colony was a powder keg, and the fuse was getting shorter by the day. As he watched the mercenaries gather, their faces set and determined, Darek realized that he was no longer an outsider here. He was part of this camp, part of its struggles and its future. And whether he liked it or not, he was going to have to choose a side. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. Subscribe to Sakura Audiobooks. Give us a thumbs up and leave a comment if you enjoy our work. Your support means a lot to us.